after a revival service when I was 18 years, but before I was 18, I was 17. Hadn't quite turned 18. We had a bonfire out after the church, and we had a service that was led by a group of college students, and they had this bonfire, and they have what they call a faggot service. A faggot is a stick. And everybody would go up and put a stick on the fire and make a commitment or whatever they needed to do, or confess their sin or whatever. And it was that night that I walked up and I put a stick on the fire and said, I believe that God is calling me to ministry. Again, not one time since that night when I was 17 years old have I ever forgotten and doubted that God wanted me to minister. After I had a divorce, which was difficult, which was hard on my kids, which was hard on everybody that knew me, when I was at the lowest part of my life, when I stood at the window and cried out to God and said, God, help me. Help me. That he was there. And I never doubt his call to ministry. But there wasn't a church anywhere that would call me as their pastor until you did. 21 years and 4 months ago. And it's been a good ride. And one of the most special relationships that any pastor could have with the church. You have loved me when nobody else would give me a chance. You have stood by me when I've gone through hard times. And I can't say enough today about Believers Baptist Fellowship. A little bitty church, not going to set any records about anything, except maybe loving. Except maybe loving. And for those of you who aren't members of this church, and who haven't attended this church, I want to tell you that you missed one of the greatest blessings of life. So church has always been a way of life, even before that call to ministry. Monticello Baptist Church in Monticello, Mississippi, while I was still 18 years old, gave me the opportunity to be their youth minister. I was a college student, and I didn't know anything. Had 1 year of college behind me. Honestly, I don't know how they put up with me, but they did. Like I said, 17 years of being the youth minister and then 4 years of being the pastor. And I got an envelope of letters yesterday from members of the Monticello Baptist Church thanking me for my ministry over 50 years ago. Precious, precious memories. On the island of Guam, a little lady, Miss Martha Gardner, came to the island to help establish our work with her husband, who had a Navy contract. He was not a military person, but a civilian person. And when she got there, there wasn't a church, so she helped start an English-speaking church on the northern part of the island. 2 or 3 years later, her husband got moved to the southern part of the island. She didn't want to drive 25 miles to church every day, so she started another church. And I was the interim pastor at the Marianna Baptist Church for over a year, and Miss Martha moved to the island of Truk. And she was at this time about 70 years old When she got there, you know what? There wasn't an English-speaking church. So what do you think she did? Started one. She called me and asked me to come, and I went to the island of the truck for several Sundays and preached in Miss Martha's home. The first Sunday there were 6 of us. She could play the accordion and only knew 2 or 3 songs. And one of those songs was Heavenly Sunshine. And I want to tell you, there was some heavenly sunshine in that building. It was a great experience. It was church. To the Monticello Baptist Church, to the First Baptist Church of Haynesville, Louisiana, to the Metairie Baptist Church in Metairie, Louisiana, and the First Baptist Church in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, I owe so much because they allowed me to be their pastor. Sometimes I didn't do very well at it. Sometimes I failed them miserably. Sometimes I failed God miserably. You know what? They love me anyway. I've always said, and I'll always believe, the 2 things about the church. Church ought to be fun, and church ought to be redemptive. Most people don't think about church being fun. In fact, most of us have been in church when it wasn't too much fun. Because the business meetings were mean and angry, and because people got mad at each other, and we did everything in the world except honor Christ. And I'm sorry about that. Because church ought to be fun, it ought to be redemptive. And nobody in the world ought to have more fun than Christians. And to do that, you don't have to have a party every Sunday. To do that, you don't have to do what a lot of the world thinks is fun. What does the world think about as fun? We're going to have a party, we're going to get drunk, we're going to do all these kind of things. Because of my teaching, not because of my goodness, but because of my teaching, because of my example of my parents, from people that I grew up with at the J.S. Baptist Church, from people like Miss Martha Gardner, I realized that you could have fun and you have to do a lot of the things the world thinks are fun. The most alcoholic beverage I've ever had was in the 2 or 3 times that I took the communion with real wine. Now I want to tell you, I got to confess this, that I at one point felt pretty cocky about that. Felt pretty self-righteous about that. Then one day I realized something. That wasn't a problem I had, but I sure did have a lot of others. And I hope and I pray that any of you who I've seen drink or you know that you drink or whatever, I hope I've never made you feel uncomfortable, because I've never intended to. I've never intended to. Because even though that wasn't a problem, I had plenty of others that were just as serious, if not worse. But I do want to tell you this. I'm almost 70 years old. Haven't been drunk a day in my life. Never used drugs a day in my life. Don't even know what a beer tastes like. And I don't know any 70-year-old person alive who's had more fun and enjoyed life than I have. And I mean that sincerely. So there was church, but there were also people. Of course, the church is people. But there were those 3 or 4 people who were very special. Already told you about 2 of them, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad Never heard my daddy say a curse word. Before he died, he had some problems. He had some mini strokes, and some people heard him say some curse words, but I didn't hear him. Never heard my daddy say a curse word. Never heard my mom say one. What did they do?
No, don't do that.
They taught me by example
Throw on the ground.
how to live.
Throw on the ground.
They taught me by example what was important. They taught me by example the things that were so right in life. And a third person I would add to that would be Tom Layton, high school football coach. I've told you about him before. He walked onto the field the first day and he said, "Here are my rules. If I say it, you can say it. If I don't say it, you can't say it. If I do it, you can do it. If I don't do it, you can't do it." And that was it. That was it. No person in the world other than my daddy that I have more respect for than Tom Layton. Now, what I want you to notice about those three people that have been so influential in my life is this. Not a one of them was a preacher. You don't have to be a preacher to be an influence. Two of my best friends in the world today, you know where they came from? Met them on the car lot. Both of them are sitting here today. Dave Bowers and Lester Brinkenship. Two of the best friends I've ever had. Two of the best friends I have today. Met them on a car lot. Used car salesmen aren't known for being too good of people. Nobody could believe it when I told them I was a preacher. And you know what? I had more opportunity to share my faith in a personal way sitting on the curb at the car lot than I've ever had sitting in my office at the church. When a drug addict walks up to you and sits down beside you and says, "Preacher, I don't do drugs like everybody else. I shut myself up in a room and I stay there for 4 or 5 dark days. Preacher, why do I do that?" And I could say anything I wanted to. And because Lee asked me that question, he couldn't get mad at me, no matter what I said. One of the best experiences of my life was selling cars, because it gave me opportunity to share my faith in a way that wasn't expected. When you come to church, you expect me to share my faith. But people on the car lot didn't, and they were surprised. Probably the best compliment that's ever been given to me is this: "You sure don't act like a preacher." I don't want to act like a preacher. I want to act like a saved sinner. A saved sinner. Because that's what I am. Coach Layton called me after I had my stroke. Walking through Walmart with Rhonda, my niece, who is here from Atlanta. And I got a phone call and I answered. It was Coach Layton, and he had heard I had a stroke. 84 years old now. Bad shape himself, but he wanted to check on Tim. Called me again a few months later to check on me, and then about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I called him. We talked for over an hour. And he talked about how sorry he was that he didn't have a greater influence than he did. That he wasn't as good a witness as he should have been. And in the midst of that conversation, he said, there are 13 ministers who played on my football team. And I thought to myself, my goodness, Coach, how could you have had any more influence? Never heard him say a curse word. Football coach, supposed to chew you out, cuss you out, get mad, and all those things. Not him. And you know what? Probably got one of the best compliments I ever got, because he said, if you're able, I want you to preach my funeral. I'm not talking about something that people can't find meaningful. I asked Roger to read that passage of scripture about the creation, because you know what? There are a lot of people who don't believe that anymore. I do. I believe God created the heavens and the earth. I believe God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for us. I believe church. I believe Christian people make a difference in your life. I believe that with all that I am. I will miss preaching. 52 years in August. I will miss preaching very much, but I won't miss my faith, because it's going to still be there. And it's going to be just as real as it's ever been. And it's going to take me through the hardest times I've ever been through, just like it always has. In the last few weeks, I've probably called upon my faith more than I have in a long time, because of a little 2-pound, 4-ounce baby that was born in Knoxville to my son who's a senior. And today she weighs 4 pounds. I'm still praying for her. My faith still makes me believe that we're going to make it through. She's going to grow up to be big and fat like her daddy. And I can't not say something about my 2 kids. PKs. PKs have a hard life, preacher's kids. I always did my best to not try to put any extra pressure on them. Expect anything out of them except to be normal teenagers. To expect them to do what other teenagers did and all that. And I want to tell you, I was so blessed because they did. They served as my associate pastors. That's what they did. And I will always love both of them. Out of my heart. All that they did. And all that they still do. And for my sweet wife who stepped in. I told you when Gene and I got married that I didn't expect her to be the associate pastor of this church. But she hasn't been. She's been more the pastor, and I've been just the preacher. And I could go on and on and on because I have so much that I'd like to say. But what I want to tell you is, folks, you can believe it. You can believe the story of God. You can believe the story of Jesus, and you ought to. And I personally believe that you ought to practice it. I believe church is important. I believe sharing your faith is important. I try not to fuss. I don't want to fuss. I want to love you enough, and I want you to love each other enough that church becomes your refuge. Don't let what happened in some churches, somebody said, keep you away from God. Don't let some bad experience in church keep you away from church, because then it's your loss. And it's your loss. But find you a church where you can love God and you can love each other. Amen. In my sermons, I've always used a lot of stories because so much of who I am and what I am is because of stories that preachers told at the J.S. Baptist Church when I was growing up, or I heard at some convention that I was attending or whatever. And I want to close with a story. My second year at the Monticello Baptist Church as youth minister, we had a revival during the summer. A guy by the name of Roy Collum, who was the evangelism director for the Mississippi Baptist Convention, came to preach. And in his sermon that night, Brother Roy told a story about a young man in his church named Jimmy. He said during a revival service that they were having that Jimmy came forward during the service, said he felt like God had called him to preach. There was only one problem with that. Jimmy wasn't playing with a full deck. He didn't have all of the smarts that most people had. He wasn't normal. And Brother Roy said he didn't know how to handle it. Didn't know what to say to it. But he said he felt like he needed to honor Jimmy's request, and so he invited Jimmy to preach his first sermon the next Sunday. Next Sunday night, Jimmy came up to preach. Brother Roy said all he could do was read the scripture, and then he'd cry. And he'd turn over a few pages, and he'd read some more scripture. And then he'd cry. And he'd turn over. Somebody set my clock to say it's time for Brian, did you do it? I didn't make it stop. Shut up. I'm very technologically challenged. But Brother Roy said that Jimmy just did that. He'd cry for a while and he'd preach for a while. And he'd cry for a while and he'd preach for a while. And finally he just closed his Bible and he said, now folks, we're going to have our invitation. And Roy said, I was so embarrassed. He said, son, what we need to have is the closing prayer and go home. But he had already announced the number of the song and everything, so he said he just stood up in front of the church, embarrassed with his head bowed, because he felt so sorry for Jimmy, because he knew that that was probably the best Jimmy would ever do. And so they went ahead and started singing. And Roy said that night that an 84-year-old man and his 61-year-old son came and accepted Christ as their Savior. He said for years and years and years, people had talked to both of them. and nobody had ever been able to touch them. But Jimmy touched them through the Spirit of God working in that service. And he said there was rejoicing and revival that broke out in that little church that night. He said finally everybody left and there was nobody left in the sanctuary but him and Jimmy. And Jimmy was at the back and he was still standing down at the front, and Jimmy came running down the aisles and just threw his arms around him and said, "Brother Roy, isn't it wonderful what God can do with an old fool like me?" And Brother Roy said he didn't know where he got the words. But he looked at him and he said, "Yes, Jimmy, it is. If God can just get his hands on that old fool." I hope, my prayer is that at least a few times in these 52 years, I allowed God to have this offer. And I hope and I pray that God can get his hands on some of you old fools. I believe that story. I've lived my life trying to share that story. And I hope Believers Baptist Fellowship, and I hope you will continue to do this thing. Thank you all. The very bottom of my heart. God, I thank you for 21 years and 4 months, the privilege of being the pastor of this church. I thank you for 52 years of being blessed to share the gospel. Please forgive me for my failures. Thank you so much for the victories. And God, if there's somebody here today who needs to hear this story, may their hearts be opened in this very moment. In Jesus' name I pray.